And joining us today, Director of Fertilizer with StoneX, Josh Linville is with us. Josh, great to have you back on the show, sir. How are you?
Hey man, I'm not doing too bad. I'd be in a lot better mood if we would, warm up and dry out a little bit here in Kansas City. But we'll take what we can get.
Well, I think a lot of folks, not only just Kansas City, but a lot of folks across the Corn Belt, hoping we warm up and dry out a little bit so they can put a crop in the ground. And as we're nearing that prime spring planting window, Josh, we've been talking a lot the last few months, really into the end of last year, about just what is going on with this fertilizer market and supply chain issues, et cetera, and prices. And let's just overview the latest for us. What are some things standing out to you? I know prices are still just very, very elevated, Josh.
Yeah, this is one of those things where we had kind of called for this to happen. I wish we weren't right. Trust me, this is one of those situations I would have loved to have been dead wrong. And fertilizer prices are a fraction of what they were, but we're still high priced, and it's still a worldwide phenomenon. It is still a tight supply market phenomenon. It's all global. Russia continues to invade Ukraine, which means Russia has cut out the global economy. Their tons are not finding homes around the world. The Chinese government has not rescinded their export ban on fertilizers, and right now, not only do I not think they're going to come back earlier, but I'm more afraid that when they do come back, it's going to be under the very, very watchful eye of the government. World supplies are tighter, world prices are higher. It is in their best interest to restrict that flow. So that's not going to be as much of a help. European natural gas prices are higher. Belarus and Russia, from a potash perspective, are a big issue. So all of these things that are going on are still continuing to happen, and all of them are continuing to keep the supplies tight. Demand's not gone anywhere with corn prices continuing to rise. It's a tight supply situation. S&D is tight. Prices stay up.
Well, and as well, we mentioned how things are kind of cool and wet right now. And as we get into spring planting, what's the supply situation looking like? As you mentioned, some of those factors. I mean, are we seeing any major disruptions, or are farmers going to have enough to get the crop in the ground here in the U.S.?
I think we have enough supply of all the major fertilizers to get through the spring season. My biggest concern is, do we have all the supplies in the right places when that spring gets there? My biggest concern right now for us is still logisticals. We went into it talking about the river system. Now, luckily, a lot of that high water issues have gone away. Barges are back to normal shipments. Rail, we heard the UP is they're cutting their shipment rate of private cars. That hurts fertilizer shipments. Trucks, we didn't magically find thousands of truckers overnight. That is still a big, big issue. So I think we have adequate supply in country. It's a matter of moving that from point A to point B, and from my memory, it's never been harder than what it is today.
Well, and you mentioned the UP railroad situation as well, and where that's, I think, a bigger area than folks are maybe really watching right now. And I know you've shed some light on that, but that's just one of the major logistical challenges. And yeah, I mean, we get into the spring season here. If we're not getting product in the right places, that's going to make things fairly tough. But also, fast forward ahead to this fall, to next year, if we still have some of those challenges, I know that is a worry as well. Not only on top of the ongoing war in the Black Sea region that could limit supplies as we move into 23.
Yeah. And that's like we're starting to do a lot more work looking at, what do we expect to happen this summer for this fall? And unfortunately, a lot of the scenarios we go through still point to higher fertilizer prices. We don't see a real big reset coming this summer. The producer is still in charge when the market is very tight like it is. And now you got to start wondering, okay, well, what does that mean? Are we going to see a normal phosphate and potash application in the fall? Are we going to see a lot more of the farm get decide, at these kind of prices, I'm going to wait till next spring? Okay, that's something we could do, and maybe that has an effect on the market. But what does that do for springtime logistics? It's hard enough to get the fall and the spring done when it's normal splits. What do you do if you front load all that into the spring season? There's a lot of different scenarios we're going to start going through, and again, scenarios that we're not used to dealing with.
Well, and you mentioned some of those scenarios, Josh, and I know there's plenty of farmers that are looking at the markets right now and they're thinking, hey, you know, should I sell a little bit, forward sell some 23 crops, some, beyond, 22 crop, et cetera, et cetera. But they're having a hard time calculating the cost of their inputs. And that's, kind of what you alluded to. That is the big like seesaw battle right now is how much can I really forward sell and forward contract when I don't know how much my cost of urea or nitrogen is going to be, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And that's a big worry. We're sitting there looking at it and we're trying to figure out what in the world is going on. What do we expect to happen? And unfortunately, when you look at the value out there, it doesn't it doesn't look like it's going to improve a lot. But then again, when I look at it, the ratio isn't great when I start looking at these 23 corn prices against where the fertilizer prices are. And I start thinking through it from a calendar perspective. We're 6 months away from the fall season. We're 12 months away from the next spring season. That is a tremendous amount of time for these markets to change. And we can see everything change 2 or 3 different times. So I guess I'm not sitting there getting all worked up. I know I talked to my dad and my uncle there over Easter dinner. We were talking a little bit about it. I said, I'm just not thrilled with buying these prices. I don't want to lock in the highest price of fertilizer I've seen in my history 6 months in advance, 12 months in advance. But if you do, please, please, please look at selling some of that grain, because if you lock in the fertilizer, you don't do anything on the grain side, that grain price starts falling out of bed. That's probably the worst value you'll ever see. That's not what you want to be a part of.
Josh, I know as well, natural gas, we've seen, I believe, 13-year highs here recently. This nat gas market just on fire. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, it is. I'm surprised it took as long as it did for that to happen. Not that I'm a natural gas expert, I'm far from it, but when you saw what's going on around the rest of the world, it was a little bit surprised that we had stayed around that $3, $4 unit. That said, this doesn't change anything from a North American perspective. Don't worry. The fertilizer manufacturer is making more than enough money still at these higher prices. We had calculated we would have to see natural gas prices get above $20 an MMBTU before it even starts to affect production rates. We are still part of it's everything is being driven by the world market. Right now, higher natural gas price in the US only means that the US manufacturer makes less money.
Well, Josh, a lot of great thoughts. Any other final thoughts you want to share with us? Anything we haven't touched on here today?
No, that's about it. It's we're kind of getting into that weird period of the year where we've got to wait and see. We've got a lot of questions we got to find out. What happens with Russia, with China, with Europe. What happens with our spring season. What happens with grain prices. Until we get more of those answers, we can't really get a great view of what's going to go on and what we should be doing or not be doing. So I think this picture gets a lot more clear over the next, say, 4 to 6 weeks, and we'll start having a lot better picture of what's going to go on, what to expect. But today's just kind of one of those weird periods.
Definitely. Well, we'll continue to watch what is going on within the fertilizer market and the fertilizer space, and hopefully have some answers soon. With that, Director of Fertilizer with StoneX, Josh Linville, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate the time.
All right. Thanks, man.